Thank you, Peter. So my name is Jesse Fink, and I'm here with my wife, Betsy Fink, sitting right over there. And first of all, I just wanted to say thank you to NCSE for putting on really a fantastic conference. We've been supporters of NCSE through our foundation for 7 years, and each year just find the topic so stimulating and so out in front. So this year, the topic of the nexus of energy, food, and water is just so relevant and something that we've been involved with for many years. My wife Betsy has really been the inspiration in our family foundation and pushed us towards looking at climate change about 15 years ago and pushed us to look at this nexus 10 years ago. We have a family farm, so firsthand we're understanding the challenges of growing food locally and sustainably. It's a real honor to stand up here and to introduce our friend Dan Barber. We've known Dan for 10 years and through lots of different ways. My sister worked with Dan at Stone Barns, and through our farm we shared animals back and forth and learning back and forth, and we've been on a similar journey. We don't really know how to cook quite as well, or to really, or to write, or to all those talents that Dan has. Besides being an amazing chef and a visionary, Dan is now an author, and after this session we'll be signing copies of his book, The Third Plate, I believe right outside, and if you haven't read it, it's an excellent book. Dan also has been featured on a Netflix series called Chef's Table, and it's really quite a moving episode to watch, and you can see what Dan and his brother David have been thinking about for all these years, and really kind of get right inside his head, which is wonderful. And if you haven't had a chance to go up to either of the restaurants that Dan has created, Blue Hill in New York and Blue Hill at Stone Barns, I highly recommend it. It is really just an amazing experience to, it's a full evening, it's multiple hours, and it's just, when the food comes out, you could just feel the love and attention that has been put into it. I had an opportunity last year to visit a pop-up restaurant that Dan created called Wasted in New York City, and he shut down the Blue Hill restaurant for a month, and it was probably the most exciting experience that I had. And it was the focus on food waste, and I hope that Dan and Kathleen will have a part of the conversation on food waste, because really at the nexus of what we're talking about here, we have to be talking about food waste, and it's great to hear the previous panelists mentioning that. But the experience that we had at Wasted really sort of culminates what I think what Dan is all about, which is the vision and the visionary of looking at a particular topic and then using his pulpit and his platform to push things forward. And the meal was an exceptional meal. It was made from all wasted food from the New York area. And the exciting part of it was during the meal, the chefs, it kind of got backwards or forwards when you look at it, where the chefs were actually, who were creating the meal and who were procuring the food, came out and served the meal, and each with a story of where the fish came from that was going to be thrown out, but instead was served. And it really, that evening experience, I think, really sort of capsulizes what Dan's all about. He is a visionary in the space and has done so much for local food, sustainable food, and just raising our consciousness in the way that we think about food and food systems. So it's really a great honor that I introduce Dan and Kathleen and have a wonderful conversation. So thank you.
So I am going to take this time to introduce my dear friend Daniel Barber. We're going to talk a little bit about the book. And then, frankly, I have to run back to GW's campus to teach my class. And Dan Barber's Third Plate book is one of our core texts. I'm teaching a class this semester called The Sustainable Plate. We're having a lot of fun. So, Dan, my first question. When I was at USDA, I've even written these out, and I'm so nervous talking to Dan here. When I was at USDA, I helped kickstart the popular Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food initiative, which largely focus on rebuilding local food systems. But is this enough? I'm going to read a short paragraph from your book. I'm going to ask you to read a brief passage, and then ask you to address the question, are we thinking deeply enough about food? So from his introduction, Dan writes, Americans have more opportunities to opt out of the conventional food chain than ever before. Farmers markets are ubiquitous, organic food is widely available, and more information about how to do it, innumerable cooking shows, and easy access to a world of online recipes. But the food culture, the way we eat, which is different than what we eat, has remained largely unaffected. So then I turned the page, not all that unawkwardly here. Just move on. And I asked Dan to start on that passage.
Okay.
It should be familiar.
Yeah. But during one summer evening, the short-sightedness of the system, I'm referring to the food system, and perhaps the reason farm to table has failed to transform the way most of our food is grown in this country, suddenly seemed obvious. In just the first few minutes of a busy dinner service, we had already sold out of a new entree of grass-fed lamb chops. For much of the month, I had been preparing the waiters for the farm's first lamb, a Finn Dorset breed fed only grass. The waiters learned about Craig, who was the livestock manager at the Stonemarks, learned about his intensive pasture management, about how the sheep were moved twice a day on the choice grass, and how the chickens followed the sheep to help ensure better grass for the next time around. It was among the most interesting things happening on the farm, if not the most delicious. To honor the addition of lamb to the menu, we carefully sketched out a new dish, which included roasted zucchini and minted pea puree minted zucchini puree. I was thinking pea puree. Well, why would pea puree? Okay, so zucchini puree made with the skins. I visited the farmer's market on an early morning sweep to supplement whatever zucchini Jack, the vegetable farmer, had promised to harvest. That night, the waiters, convincing as waiters tend to be when they get their hands on a good story, succeeded in selling the lamb chops to each and one of those first tables, sometimes to every diner at the table. There were 16 individual chops per lamb. We had 3 animals, so 48 chops were ready for roasting, 3 to a plate. After months of work, years of grass management, a 4-hour round trip to the slaughterhouse, and a butcher breaking down the animals with the patience and skill of a surgeon, we had sold out of the lamb in the time it takes to eat a hot dog.
So that's right there in the opening of your book. It's a pretty
I got rid of the menu about a month later.
What are you trying to tell the reader there? What are you trying to tell this audience?
The conventions of an a la carte, the conventions of a Western conception of a high-end restaurant menu just didn't work with the connection with the relationship that we were having with Stonemarks and with other farmers. And that example of the lamb was quite striking for me because it was obvious we had 3 lambs for lamb chops and we were a busy restaurant, and we sell out right away. So this idea that we could section off an animal or a part of the farm, a certain vegetable or a certain grain, and put it on the menu and think that we were acting in a way that was holistic with the ecological realities of the farm seemed crazy. And so we got rid of the menu and we replaced it with a kind of you don't know what you're getting when you sit down and we cook for you. And so we divide the lamb for you. So if you come to the restaurant and you seem especially excited about the farm, I'm only picking you because you're in my sight line, you look like you're a good eater. And you're asking questions about the farm and you seem to have an interest in what's going on. Well, we might serve you lamb neck and we might serve with the lamb neck a little salad of the tongue. And for a gentleman that I can't see back there, you know, who's having I don't know, a Wall Street financial meeting and is ordering a big Bordeaux and asks the waiter if there's any steak on the menu, and then gets an explanation on why there's no steak and seems disappointed, but instead says, you know, I'll have a lot of meat. Well, then we might give that certain person the lamb chop. And we'll continue to divide it according to the night. So the waiters have this interaction with the tables and see, well, what are they interested in? Where are they coming from? And how can we take this animal and also the entirety of the farm and divide it up into a thing. So it's a little bit of like gastronomic profiling, but it's done gently. And sometimes we're right and sometimes we're really wrong. But overall, we're getting better at it over these years. But that experience was really, we started a whole sort of thought process for me, which was, what is farm to table? What is sustainability? What's the chef's responsibility in this role? And I am talked about, or used to be talked about as sort of the leader of this farm to table movement. But here I was, advertising just one aspect of it and not looking at it from the way that I had to look at it in this relationship with the farm. And I had another, to extend this example from the animals, and I think it's a larger issue. I ended up, not long after this experience, visiting Klaus Martins, who ends up being the hero of this book. He's a friend of Kathleen and I in upstate New York. He's a grain farmer, and I had been talking about his wheat and baking with his wheat in our breads. Delicious bread made from his emmer wheat, and the kind of bread that just jaw-droppingly delicious. And so I wanted to, when I was starting out to write the book, I wanted to write about, well, what is the recipe for growing this emmer wheat? So I went up to the farm and I stood in the middle of Klaus's field, and I looked around. There's 2,000 acres surrounding us, and I saw no wheat. What I saw instead was a lot of cover crops, a lot of leguminous crops, beans and kidney beans and cowpeas. I saw barley and buckwheat. I saw all these soil building crops. He was explaining to me, as it was very obvious to see surrounding me, was this methodical and thoughtful set of rotation grains that were meant to build soil. Actually, he was building soil in part to get the soil to the right kind of situation that grew that kind of wheat that I was just talking about. And so here I was, the farm-to-table hero, advertising this one particular crop, wheat, like the lamb chop, and calling myself a farm-to-table chef without looking at all the other crops that this farmer Klaus needed to grow to build soil to get me that wheat. And the irony, actually, is that all those other crops I just mentioned, many of which are the staples of, as we know, traditional cuisines and diets, do not have a market in this country. And so, to a large extent, or almost 100% actually of what he grows, of what I just mentioned, goes into animal feed, bag feed for animals. So he's basically losing money on all those other crops, and then charging me and other chefs quite a bit of money for that emmer wheat and making up the economy on his wheat. And it seems so crazy that I could hang my hat on this one crop without looking at the whole system. That really changed my approach, as did this lamb chop example. So it became actually a challenge to think about what is it that farmers like Klaus need to grow, and then how can I incorporate that into my cooking as a cuisine, and that became kind of the basis for the third play. So.
Cool.
Okay.
We got through that one.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not only a big fan of yours, but I'm also in love with Wes Jackson. He may be interested to find that out today. Who has until recently been the head of the Land Institute down in Kansas. If you've never gone to their website, I recommend it. It's landinstitute.org. And one of the headlines on the website says, quote, "The plow has destroyed more options for future generations than the sword." Now, you devote a fourth of your book to soil. I would dare say that's not a typical subject matter for a chef. And you come to a surprising conclusion. I'm going to quote a sentence here that you write, and it's represented throughout the book. You say, if a great tasting carrot is tied to the abundance of soil organisms, a bad tasting carrot comes from the absence of soil life. What is it that you want us to understand about soil, about perennialism, about taste? Why should we, as the bumper sticker states, stop treating our soil like dirt?
And why is a chef writing about soil is a question I'm often asked, and why is the cover of my book. And a chef who failed 8th grade biology, where my soil education began and ended very quickly. I was really out to search for flavor, and I kept running into these complex systems like the ones I mentioned, these rotations from these brilliant farmers like Klaus. And it seemed like all roads kept leading back to soil, and so I was sort of forced into learning more about the subject, and soil became sort of the hero of the book. But I didn't know how to write about soil. How do you write about soil? How do you, for people in this room, well, it's pretty interesting, I'm sure. So, but for most people, it's like, how are you going to get through? Right? You know, I found it so challenging, and I went about it sort of the way like. Was it Jessica Seinfeld says you cook vegetables for kids, like you hide it so they don't know that they're eating vegetables. So I'd be writing this all throughout the book, but hiding it and weaving in and out and trying not to stay too long on the subject, but getting across the points I wanted to get across. And I realized it wasn't working, although I didn't actually really until another conversation with Klaus, when it really became obvious to me. But I was walking in the field with Klaus so much later than that first example of standing in the field and realizing that I was the farm-to-table emperor with no clothes. This was a few years later, actually, and I was walking through it, and he was, I all of a sudden, he was talking about soil and saying, she communicates to me this way, and he would point to a certain weed, and she communicates this way. And he spoke with such passion, it was like he was speaking about a lover. And I thought, at that moment, I said, that's it. Soil is a character. And it freed me. It was so it was very exciting. This sort of, anyway, the challenge for me of writing was it's an enormous one. I get very stressed, and I just at that moment I just felt so free. It's like it's a character I can write about as if it's a person, and it's really changed my life actually. Without saying this in too much of a kumbaya way, like soil does talk to you. It's just that we really don't know the language, and that a person like Klaus opens the door to this experience of looking out in the field, as I am now trained to do because of the time I've spent with him. And Blue Hill is a farm in the Berkshires. I'm driving there somewhat often. I'm passing fields, and I see a field of yellow flowers. And from Klaus, I know yellow flowers are a sign of sulfur deficiency. Or I see milkweed, and I know that there's deficiencies in zinc. Or I see the beautiful Queen Anne's lace, and I know that there are fertility problems in that area. Or I see dogweed or thistle, and I know that means there's compacted soil, and the soil needs to breathe. So really, soil's talking to us. It's just we don't have the language to respond. And the key to this, besides it's kind of interesting to look out on a field of grass and have a conversation, and that's interesting in and of itself. But for a chef, the trick, I think, is to really hear what soil is saying, expressed mostly through weeds, actually, and to be able to correct the situation, to answer the call. It's sort of like the soil is putting up its hand with a yellow flower and saying, I need zinc. And to be able to add a rotation of a crop that provides that, to give the biological, or in many cases the chemistry opportunity for that deficiency to be available and taken up as well is then translated into beautiful taste. Truly jaw-dropping taste, as I said before. And I hesitate to even say that because it sounds so frou-frou. We tend to, I think, frown a little bit on people who talk excitedly about flavor. Although as a chef, I'm kind of free to do that a little bit more, but I know the limitations of it. But the interesting is that when you speak about soil, you can get bored. how deep can you get into the mechanics and the science of soil is a question, but everyone can connect to flavor. And if you see the direct line between flavor and soil health, it's a really wonderful coexistence. So anyway, I'm there because my interest is in flavor, and so I see that there is a direct correspondence, and you can taste it in wine. The greatest wines of the world, the great Bordeaux or whatever, even if you haven't had a lot of wines, when you tasted a great wine, one thing that is universal to human experience with great wine is the permanence of it. You taste it and you breathe out, and it's like, wow, God, it's really very deep, it's very rich, it's very, and 5 minutes later, you're still tasting it, right? Has anyone had that experience in this room? Yes? Yes, I've been lucky enough to have it. It's really incredible, and a wine that's been open for a day or two and stays as expressive or more expressive and stays open. Well, that's really soil biology at work expressed through the fruit, and you don't get that out of poor soil or badly managed soil. You only get it out of soil that is biologically active and available for the nutrients, and then that fruit or that grain or that vegetable is expressed through flavor. I think that's a nice correspondence to be in because it's so pleasurable.
So there's been a lot of discussion recently about the role of meat in a sustainable diet. The federal government has just released their new dietary guidelines for Americans, and they did not take up the Scientific Advisory Committee's recommendation of some language around sustainability as a component for dietary choice. Many advocates are out there calling for removal of meat in the diet for sustainability reasons. What are your thoughts on this, Chef? In your book, you write about foie gras, which seems to me to be kind of almost the other end of the spectrum, and yet you write, and I quote you, "The transcendental act of good cooking turns out to be more than just culinary. It's an ecological act too." So given the amount of land, water, and energy it takes to raise livestock, what should we be thinking about?
Well, the example you've given about I met this foie gras producer in southern Spain, and you're right, it's a little bit out in left field, but I became enamored with his foie gras, with the taste of this goose liver, because it was so delicious. But in learning why it was so delicious, I trace back to the fact that he was not, this man's name is Eduardo Sousa. Eduardo was not force feeding his geese. He was doing what he was referring to as natural gavage. Gavage is the French term for force feeding tremendous amounts of grain down a goose or duck's throat and fattening the liver over time. But he was doing it naturally and trying to kickstart the goose's natural DNA to overstuff themselves when the weather turns cold in the fall. And so you get these beautifully fatty livers naturally at a certain time of the year, but only at a certain time of the year. You can't have it all year long. And as he explained to me, it really dates back to a Jewish tradition that the Jews discovered this apparently in ancient Egypt. This is according to Eduardo. I found no supporting facts about this, but the Jews invented foie gras in ancient Egypt, and the pharaoh loved the foie gras so much. And the Jews invented it, meaning that they gave the geese as much as they could eat when the weather started to turn a little bit cold, and they stopped themselves, and they noticed that after slaughter they had these enormous livers. So the pharaoh got wind of this, and then the pharaoh started to demand this delicacy, this foie gras, year-round. And the Jews who would have been killed if they couldn't give the pharaoh what they wanted year-round started to force feed to give the pharaoh liver year-round. That's how we have foie gras today. Did you ever know that? That's a good little. Anyway, so the idea, this trip to Spain and this man Eduardo was sort of a parable for my understanding about our relationship with meat, and so we serve quite a bit of meat at the restaurant, and I cook with a lot of meat, and my personal feeling is that, well, I feel like eating meat, there's a lot of defense for that, and especially in our ecology, the Shenandoah Valley, I would probably argue too, but certainly in the Hudson Valley, it was sculpted for animal agriculture. The iconic views of the Hudson Valley are based on farmers' families carving out land for dairy and for livestock, and that's because the grass is perfectly suited to livestock. It makes a lot of sense, but do we eat too much meat? Of course we eat too much meat, and we eat too much of the wrong kinds of meat, not just the kinds of meat that are fed the wrong things, cows fed grain, etc., but also just cuts of meat. We are enamored with the lamb chop, with the center cuts. And so the third plate is actually a title about how we should be repositioning our plate of food and turn the architecture of a plate on its head and stop fetishizing the 7-ounce steak or 6-ounce chicken breast or 8-ounce fillet of fish, but instead serve a plate of food that's more in keeping with the carrying capacity of the world. And for the Hudson Valley, that doesn't mean no meat. It means actually a dish that I served last night, which is a carrot that was pulled from the ground at Stone Barns in late October, and we've been hanging the carrot in the meat locker along with the sides of pigs and along with the chickens and the geese and the grass-fed beef. We've been hanging hundreds of these carrots, and we've been preserving them in beef fat. So over the course of the last 2 months, the carrots have been slightly fermenting in the beef fat and taking on a real hearty beef flavor. And so last night, for the first time, we roasted this 60-day aged carrot hung in the beef fat. And we served it with like a rich bordelaise sauce. So this is not a vegetarian dish at all. It's a rich bordelaise sauce made from the bones of beef animals. We served it with the marrow from beef. We had a little oxtail, a cut of beef that one doesn't normally eat in this country. We made a little marmalade instead of ketchup or whatever. We made a marmalade of oxtail. Don't you have ketchup with your steak? I don't know why we wanted meat on the plate, and so we had the sauce and the marrow and the oxtail, and then we did the classic accompaniments to a steak, creamed spinach and onions and potatoes. And so we did this on a cart. We rolled the cart to the table. We carved the carrot like you would a steak, and we served the carrot steak as the center of the plate, and then the meat as accompaniments. And so it's a little bit of like wit. I mean, it's a little bit of sort of whatever playfulness in that we're reinterpreting a steak dinner. But also, for the Ecological Association, it's probably a very good one because the carrying capacity of land says, at least at this time of year, root vegetables should be taking center stage and meat should play a secondary role. And so a plate of food that mirrors that ecological reality, I think, is probably the future of really good eating. And it just takes some imagination on the part of people who love to eat, and chefs in particular, who I have carry a lot of the baggage here, or a lot of the weight of reinterpreting a plate, as we should, because we are doing that every day. It seems to me like that's the most provocative and interesting way to think about the future of good food.
So what about other proteins? I know you've thought a lot about fish. You have more than 2.5 million people have watched you on YouTube at your TED video.
Just to be clear, Kathleen wrote me yesterday and said, "I can't believe 200,000 people have watched your show," and I answered her back and said 2.5 million, but who's counting? So
He's counting. Anyhow, it's a great
very obsessed with my numbers.
So this is what you write. 1/3 of the seafood eaten in the United States is ordered in restaurants. 2/3 if you measure in total expenditures rather than volume. Chefs control what gets taken from the sea. In your book, you tell the story of Angel Leon, the chef owner of a tiny 30-seat restaurant at the far southwestern tip of the Iberian Peninsula. You shared a meal together at this restaurant, and you write it was one of those meals that forever transformed how you think about food.
Yeah, well, he's just a brilliant chef. If you ever can find yourself in southern Spain, I would seek out the chef Angel Leon. He has not been written about that much. He's absolutely brilliant. I mean, he is brilliant. He's also crazy and very nuts. But in a genius. He's a genius, and he's got ADHD, and he's bipolar, and He's all over the place. But when he's able to concentrate on cooking, he's absolutely brilliant. And his relationship with the ocean is like, you know, I mean, he's the fish whisperer, and he's fishing every day, and he's grown up, you know, fishing his whole life. His dad was a fisherman. And what his life's goal is to make you understand the plight of the ocean, and he does that through the menu. So he makes you, actually, he has you order based on trophic levels. So if you want to order tuna, let's say, you're really going to pay for it in this restaurant. And it's going to be a small portion of it. It just reverses the whole thing. He puts tuna steak as an appetizer, as sort of an amuse. And then your main course is most often phytoplankton, which, as you know, is the lowest of them. It's the microscopic plants that all ocean life eat. And he's after connecting you with the basis of ocean life. He does it through phytoplankton, and so he's and also trash fish. So he pays fishermen to take fish that would otherwise be thrown away, and he damaged fish that have been damaged through the netting process, or just fish that have no market. And he's created these beautiful dishes. And so when you go to his restaurant, it's really like an introduction to a whole new way of cooking and all new ingredients. It's very fascinating to be able to write about someone who's a real character and easy to write about. So I learned a lot. But I just as a larger point is just and it sort of connects to all this, is a little bit about waste too, is that, you know, much of what we love about cuisines, about cultures, is their cuisines, and much of what we love about their cuisines are these classic dishes. And what I learned from Anel, what I learned really through the research of this book is that classic cuisines, the great dishes, French, just think of French dishes that I know French cuisine a bit, you know, bouillabaisse. Bouillabaisse is a trash fish dish. It's a dish that when the fishermen came off from the dock, the wives took the damaged fish, the fish that were unsellable, and they made this beautiful broth filled with this fish. And it became iconic southern French fish dish, as does pot au feu, which is offcuts of meat and storage vegetables. And so did a half dozen other dishes, French dishes, that I cook with in my restaurants. These are all based on classic cuisine where peasants were forced into a negotiation with the land and were trying to figure out what could they cook with, and what was healthy and what was delicious, and make dishes out of that. And that seems to me also to be the change in architecture, from the lamb chops and the wheat to a more holistic approach to what the land can provide. And a lot of that is looking back at what did these peasants figure out thousands of years ago, and how can we reinterpret that for today? You know, we are increasingly forced into the negotiations, or we will be increasingly forced into those kind of negotiations that peasants were forced into, and they came up with some brilliant ideas of utilizing waste, but they didn't call it waste. They called it pot au feu.
So Dan, back in the days when I was up at Tufts, I used to bring my students to the Belchertown Apple Research Station, over 200 varieties, and the students would be so excited, and they have these wonderful experiences, and they would never be able to find one of those apples again in a grocery store. And it really was in my mind when I'm reading your book and all of the information that you have about wheat and just the lack of diversity that we have. So I know that you've become a bit of a plant breeder. Tell me about Barber wheat.
So Barber wheat is the opposite of that emmer wheat that I was talking about before. Emmer wheat is that heritage heirloom grain that chefs love so much, and also tend to fetishize because it's so delicious and in short supply. But what I started to learn through the course of writing this book was that if we're really talking about a food system that feeds the democratization of this kind of food, we need to look to plant breeders to help take the genetics of the past and marry them with modern genetics to increase yield, because these older varieties agronomically are really risky and fraught and very expensive. And so only a chef like me can afford it. How do we expand on the idea, and how do we take these genetics and make them available to more people, and also make them more delicious, and also make them more regional? so that a grain like wheat isn't just grown in Kansas, but is grown back where it should be, which is everywhere. We're a wheat culture. The Western civilization was built on wheat, and we still eat more wheat than anything else, more wheat than fish, for sure, more wheat than fish and chicken combined. We eat more wheat than meat, actually. The only thing that's not true of is dairy. So we're very much a wheat culture, and so I explore wheat quite a bit in this book, and I ended up trying to get a wheat breeder to save an old variety similar to Emmer, and he said he wouldn't do it, but he would improve it. And I thought, that's like a guy who follows his YouTube numbers too obsessively. And he was so haughty, I took him up on the challenge, and he did it, and I did it with him side by side. I talked about a guy who failed the biology. I bred a new wheat by marrying an old variety called Aragon 3 with a modern variety, and a la Trump, I called it Barber wheat, and it's done incredibly well. I actually don't mean that as a Trumpism. It actually has done really well. Last year it harvested 156 bushels an acre. I heard someone gasp. Is someone a wheat farm around here? No? So seriously, 156 bushels. I said to a wheat farmer a couple months ago, and he just thought, he actually walked away from me. He thought I was joking with him. The average bushels of wheat in Kansas last year was 28 bushels. That's in Kansas, in the epicenter of wheat country, 22. So this is not a small, albeit this was grown in the West. It was grown on great soil, and it was a test plot. So 156 bushels, it might not be repeated, but it goes to show you that in the pursuit of flavor, we were selecting for flavor. You don't have to give up on yield. We don't need the preciousness and the antiquated idea of agriculture with heirlooms and heritage breeds. Actually, we can take that genetics and marry it into the future. And Barber wheat is a good example of that because it's producing so much tonnage, literally tonnage, 156 bushels, and it's drought tolerant because one of the Aragon 3, that older variety, comes from southern Spain where there is no rain. So it's got the genetics in there for drought tolerance, and it produces beautiful, delicious wheat at a great tonnage. And so to me, it becomes a kind of idea of how do we do this for the future across more vegetables and grains, and how can we use breeders and land grant breeders who our tax dollars go to anyway. How can we get them away from breeding for agribusiness, which is where most of their energy and time goes towards, because that's what most people eat, and instead encourage them to breed for regional food systems and for flavor. So these are very interesting prospects for a delicious future anyway.
Couple more questions. So in the epilogue, you write, in a nod to the Mennonite belief that you begin raising the child long before it's born, I set out to create a menu that Blue Hill will serve a generation from now. A playbook for a new cuisine, one designed to create demand for soil-improving crops and enlarge our sense of what is delicious. What does the third plate, the menu of 2050, look like? Most importantly, what do you really need from the scientists in this room? How do we get there?
Well, I think that the menu of the future looks, I hope, a little bit like a carrot steak I was describing before, where we're inverting the architecture of the plate, as I said, and we're also eating the whole farm. So we're not encouraging, or chefs are not encouraging these staple ingredients, the zucchini, the tomatoes, the wheat, the corn, and instead looking holistically at what does a farmer need to produce and how can we eat a diet that supports those rotations or the kinds of foods that the landscape is telling us it needs to grow. To me, that's the basis of a cuisine. That's the backbone of a cuisine. And I think it's the future because the resources that produce food, as we all know in this room, are becoming more fraught and more expensive, and the carrying capacity is becoming heavier by the day. And so we need to rethink the architecture of the plate. So I created a menu of 50 years in the book to sort of dream of what it would look like. But I think, Kathleen, you're right, that the science is just so important here, and the science devoted to flavor, I think, is a good pursuit and a smart one, because I've never tasted anything truly delicious that doesn't have the right kind of soil attached to it, that doesn't have the right kind of seed attached to it. There's no such thing as a delicious carrot, truly delicious carrot, that doesn't have the right seed, the right soil, the right kind of rotations that went into that soil beforehand. There's no such thing as a carrot that's grown hydroponically that's truly jaw-droppingly delicious. I haven't tasted it. There is in the future. I'd like to see it. My mind's open to it, but for now, I see soil as the determining factor, and I see science playing into the hands, too much playing into the hands of yield and not enough for flavor. And I think the future should look more at, well, what are we tasting? And do we believe that taste is the soothsayer, as I write in the book, the soothsayer for good agriculture and the right kind of sustainability. So that's my call for the future.
Now, I harken back to Jesse's wonderful introduction. So you've been quoted as saying that 70 years ago, lobster was served to prisoners, and that there was a law that forbade it being served more than twice a week because that would be considered inhumane. You use this example to alert us to the issue of food waste, which you've already discussed a little bit here today, and the role of culture in food choices as well. Tell us more about your agenda here. Is it true? Is it true that you served a meal made entirely from food waste to 40 heads of state?
Yes, it's true. I did just, I guess, the point for American cuisine or American habits are that food habits just changed dramatically. You know, there's a lot of bad things to say about American food culture. Like we don't have much of a culture, and that we dumb it down, and that it's just, we all know the negatives. The positive is that we tend to move dramatically when we're excited about something, either for health or taste or whatever it is. Greek yogurt. Like, where did Greek yogurt come from? 5 years ago, there was no Greek yogurt. And so that's a very I don't know, inspired possibility that our food habits can change and change dramatically and en masse. I mean, that should give us a feeling of good energy here for our work. The negative is that we often don't put the pieces together. So when we love Greek yogurt, we forget that the byproduct of Greek yogurt is whey, and that when there's excess of whey, there's a question of where does the whey go, and the whey becomes toxic, as it is in upstate New York. It's being dumped onto farms because there's so much of it, in part because of Chobani's popularity. And so what is a incredibly delicious culinary ingredient? I mean, the Greeks, you take the whey from Greek yogurt and you marinate lamb with it, or you make those beautiful summer elixirs. You incorporate it into the cuisine because it's the byproduct of Greek yogurt. It's a byproduct of sifting off the yogurt. And so it's sort of what we need to think about as we think about waste, is not just shining a light on waste and saying we ought not to waste as much food as we waste, 40% of what's produced, and that's an alarming number, and it's shocking, and it will last about as long as this conversation for us to really change our habits. To me, I think the power of the plate, or the power of food, is to change habits and trends through pleasure. And so to introduce whey and barley and buckwheat and those leguminous crops I talked about in the beginning, or the oxtail, or the carrot grown in the right soil, those are the kinds of pleasure principles that seem to change minds and create trends. And that's the challenge for anyone who loves food and for chefs for the future of food.
Yeah, thank you for your beautiful book. And hold on, Peter, I'm watching the clock. I would like you to send us off to lunch by reading this little bit from the conclusion of your book.
Before I conclude the book, I just want to say to you, it's very flattering to have you such a supporter of me. I always has. But for those of you in this room, I just want you to know my interpretation of Kathleen's career, especially the last few years at USDA. And she's just been an amazing force of good, directly for chefs, really, but for all of us who love food and agriculture. She's been this shining light in some dark days, and really changed minds and brought her incredible intelligence. And I don't know if any of you have gotten in an argument with Kathleen, but you don't want to. Like you don't want to get on the stage when she says, don't get on the stage kind of thing. But I would like to just say thank you for all of your work and continued passion on the subject. With that, I will close it. Really ended there, but okay, here, Aldo Leopold, there we go. Aldo Leopold once wrote that the right kind of farming doesn't discard any of nature's component parts. To keep every cog and wheel is the first precaution of intelligent tinkering, he wrote. The right kind of cooking does the same thing. It promotes the vibrant communities above and below ground that make food delicious in the first place. It's not unlike what I hoped we as chefs and as eaters could do in imagining a third plate. The idea is to think not only about ingredient combinations, but about how they're combined and how that reflects the larger picture. Those connections begin before the plate and they extend beyond it. They are more than the sum of their parts. They have the power to change culture and to shape landscapes. Maybe what Jack the farmer said that day at the bar with me and Glenn is exactly the right way to think about the third plate for the future. Rooted in the natural world, it becomes a blueprint for one big farm, forever in flux, connected to a larger community, narrated by a cook through his food. Thank you all very much.